Welcome to this introduction on water and hydration. Water is an unusual macronutrient in that it provides no energy, in the sense that it can't be converted to ATP, the energy currency of the body. It is, however, essential in that we need it, and quite regularly, in order to survive. You've probably heard or read about around 3/4 or 75% of our body is made up of water. Now that's somewhat higher than reality, and we'll revisit this. However, much of our body is made up of water, and that water is vital. Most of the processes that make life alive happen inside water, within and around our cells. And so many tissues and organs are made mostly of water. For example, blood is about 83% water in someone who's well hydrated. The kidneys, whose job it is to filter things out of the blood, basically, unsurprisingly, are also predominantly water. Muscle, that's getting pretty close to that 3/4 water, so 76% on average. The brain is basically also heavily water. The non-water part is mostly fat. The skin is also mostly water. Now the skeleton, on the other hand, is relatively low in water, but still, it's about 1/5 water. Just to be clear though, human beings being 75% water is pretty much a myth for most people, except for maybe lean infants. Consider that most people are 20% or more body fat. Then there are the proteins and the minerals, so this would be impossible. So consider this myth busted. We lose water in urine and sweat, in feces, and also we breathe it out. And not fully replacing the water we lose leads to dehydration. Common symptoms of dehydration, especially more mild to moderate dehydration, are thirst, a pretty good indicator that we should be drinking something. A dry mouth, dry skin, and a loss of elasticity of the skin. Darkening urine, and also less urine production than maybe we would ordinarily do. Headache, sense of fatigue. There can be changes in blood pressure as well. An increase in constipation, especially if this is a more chronic dehydration, not just a short one-off. And potentially cramps. So if you experience any of these symptoms, try drinking more water than you currently do. It might be the easiest and cheapest way to really improve how good your health is and how well you feel and function. Thirst, again, is a pretty good giveaway that we need more water. But as we'll cover shortly, for some people thirst is not really the best indicator. More severe dehydration leads to additional symptoms such as nausea, irritability, brown or even darker urine. It can also lead to rapid breathing, easier overheating. So in a hot climate especially, it's very important to be well hydrated. It can lead to confusion. This particularly, we'll come back to this, affects the elderly. It can change heartbeat, so rapid breathing and rapid heartbeat. A sense of dizziness, and also a more visible sign is sunken eyes. Now, if you experience any of these symptoms and you suspect dehydration either because of not drinking for a long time or large losses of water due to, for example, diarrhea or excessive sweating, then drink immediately as well as seeing a medical professional. Contrary to what is often pushed by the sports drink industry, thirst is actually generally a good indicator of hydration in healthy people. We don't all need to be looking really carefully at our urine all the time. However, thirst may be only a poor indicator of hydration in children, especially young children, and in senior citizens. That's because the sense of thirst takes time to develop, so children may already be dehydrated before they get an urge to drink. They may simply be so distracted by their activity that they don't pay attention to their thirst. And then later in life, roughly around the age of 50, our sense of thirst starts to decline. Exercise can also weaken our sensitivity to thirst just when we're most likely to need extra water, so keep that in mind. And chronic dehydration is particularly a problem in institutionalized elderly, where it's linked to things like delirium, general cognitive decline, and possibly elevated blood pressure, as well as increased risk of kidney disease. And we'll revisit prolonged dehydration a little bit shortly. So if thirst isn't always reliable, how else can we check if we're hydrated? The simplest answer, and a popular answer, is checking the color of the urine. This is certainly intuitive, but surprisingly perhaps, not well supported by the research. The research suggests that that's not a very good way of assessing hydration, at least not in that milder dehydration state. That's why we should treat the so-called P charts with some caution. I actually developed my own before looking a bit deeper into the research literature, so it's quite understandable if someone's a little bit misled on this. By all means, get a general indication of hydration based on the colour of urine, as shown, for example, in this chart. But be aware that several factors other than hydration can influence urine colour. For example, certain foods like beetroot, blueberries, rhubarb, for some people asparagus, taking B vitamin supplements, some food dyes, and some medications. These can all add colour to the urine and make it seem more concentrated and therefore more of an indicator of dehydration than it actually is. The colour of urine doesn't just reflect how well hydrated we are or whether we've recently eaten certain things. It can also provide deeper insights into our health, but that's really for medical professionals to investigate. If someone is drinking plenty of water, which for most people would mean 2 or more litres a day, but has coloured urine not explained by food or medication and still feels thirsty most all of the time, they should definitely see their doctor, as this may be a symptom of serious disease. There are some terms worth knowing in relation to hydration, other than just dehydration and hydration, which I'm going to assume you now understand a bit better. So these additional terms include euhydration. That's not too little nor too much water in the body, what we would think of as hydrated. Hypohydration. That's too little water in the body or part of the body, and we would associate that with dehydrated. Hyperhydration is too much water in the body or part of the body, or overhydrated. But if urine colour is not that great at showing hydration status, what is good, or what can we do instead? Well, we can certainly get a good estimate of hydration status using urine, but we need to measure its specific gravity, also called relative density. The more concentrated the urine is in terms of things like sodium, potassium, urea, etc., the greater its specific gravity, and the more we're moving into a state of dehydration. We can also look at plasma, basically blood minus the cells, and measure osmolality, which is another measure of how concentrated or how dilute something is. If the concentration of things such as sodium and proteins is very high, it indicates dehydration, and if it's very low, it indicates over or hyperhydration. Another method is bioelectrical impedance, which involves passing a small current into the body and measuring basically what comes out. This can give an indication of hydration, but it works best if there's a baseline measure of euhydration to compare it to. It's more of a relative than an absolute measure because it also depends a lot on body fat. While actual hydration status is not that easy to measure, we need some less than common equipment. It is easy to fairly accurately work out how much water someone needs to be replacing while being, say, physically active or spending a certain set of time in quite a warm environment. All we need is to weigh the person before the activity, then have them dry themselves down and weigh again after the activity. The difference will be water lost. Now, of course, this means not drinking anything between the two weighings and assumes no voiding of the bladder, for example. Those things could be accounted for, but everything would need to be weighed quite carefully. Moving on, I do sometimes see a loss of ability to distinguish thirst from hunger, and this can be common well before the age of 50. It may come from the fact that many people drink beverages full of sugar, which may be a little confusing for our bodies. We know, for example, that our bodies don't register the calories in drinks the same way they do the calories in more solid food. To see just how much sugar is tucked away in many drinks, including fruit juice, watch the second module on carbohydrates. Whatever the reason for confusing thirst for hunger, the solution is simple. Whenever you feel hungry, drink a glass of plain water and wait 20 minutes or so. You may find your hunger disappears, or at least gets less. It's a win-win solution for you, as you avoid dehydration and avoid eating what your body doesn't actually need. So, drinking enough water, especially a glass or two before a meal, can help reduce your appetite. And it turns out that drinking water can also help burn a little more energy. The research on this is limited, and what has been found are only modest changes, but as things go that help you get leaner, this is about as cheap, easy and safe as it gets. It's worth mentioning that getting enough water can help control blood pressure. Drinking water has a direct effect on one of the ways our body controls blood pressure. For example, drinking water has been studied as a way to prevent fainting after giving blood. In this scenario, it prevents the drop in blood pressure often experienced when donating blood. What the research shows is that it has to be plain water to be maximally effective. There are also many who blame high blood pressure on chronic dehydration, but although the explanations offered seem to make sense, and at least in the short term, dehydration actually reduces blood pressure. Now that may be different from more chronic long-term hydration. Staying well hydrated is, however, accepted as important for health generally, and better health leads to better blood pressure. It's also worth repeating that one of the other symptoms of prolonged dehydration is constipation. So before thinking about increasing dietary fiber, which helps some and doesn't help others basically, can even make it worse in some, consider addressing hydration first if constipation is a problem. So what to do? Although our bodies do get water from all manner of drinks as well as from food, plain water remains the best option to meet your hydration needs under most circumstances. Plain water contains no energy, so no calories, is fairly easily absorbed by the body at a wide range of temperatures, and is fairly economical. For the most part, I think bottled water is a con. In many cases, bottled water is just some other place's tap water, possibly dechlorinated, if we're lucky, put in a bottle. And plastic bottles are an environmental catastrophe and may actually contaminate the water that they contain if we keep reusing them or if the water is poured in quite hot. Filtered water out of glass bottles or steel bottles is a good option. I would recommend people get the best water filter system that they can reasonably afford. Now, filtering water isn't about avoiding food poisoning, at least not in most places. You may be traveling, you may be in certain countries watching this where that is the case, but it's not what it's usually about. Most water supplies in economically well-developed countries are checked and treated to ensure they aren't dangerous in terms of their levels of bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Filtering water, therefore, is about removing things that won't make you sick today or tomorrow or even probably the next year, but then can add up over the years. Filtering is about removing chloride, fluoride, pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals, microplastics, another problem with plastic bottles, and a host of other contaminants that are likely to be in your tap water in amounts deemed safe by some, but often based on pretty limited evidence, and with little consideration going into, well, what happens to us if we consume this over years, not just days or weeks. Another point to make is that boiling water will not remove these contaminants, unless you're actually distilling the water, where boiling is part of the process, but not all the process. When you're advised to boil water for safety, this is to avoid infection from waterborne bacteria, viruses, or parasites. The heat kills those, but it won't get rid of heavy metals, for example. So if you have the option, use filtered water for your hot beverages as well as for cooking and drinking cold. Now, some people argue that water should contain minerals, but even mineral waters usually only contain tiny amounts compared to whole foods, so this argument has limited merit. As soon as water enters your mouth, it will mix with saliva and the salts in your mouth, though there's little need to worry excessively about how your body will react to fairly pure water. Now, if you're constantly drinking distilled water, there might be a little bit of an issue with it leaching some minerals from the teeth. But if you have it regularly around food time, that's going to go away as well. Some people just don't like plain water. I used to be one of them, so I can appreciate the feeling. Probably the most neutral ways to add a little flavour to your water is to throw in some lemons, limes, berries, or even herbal tea. Now, if you're going to do this, sort of as an aside and as a tip, do use thoroughly washed, preferably organic fruit. If organic is unaffordable for you, squeeze some lemon or lime juice into your water instead of putting the whole fruit in. Pesticides and herbicides will be mainly, although not exclusively, on the skin. Coffee, black, and green teas are not suitable alternatives to water, as they have a diuretic or urine-forming effect and act as stimulants due to the caffeine they contain. Having coffee, black or green teas does count toward the water you're having, it just isn't as good as plain water, so have some plain water as well. Carbonated drinks with sugar or artificial sweeteners are also not suitable alternatives to water, for a host of health-related reasons. If you need to wean yourself off carbonated drinks, juices, iced tea, and can't do it all in one go, restrict them to meal times and dilute them with water for the best effect and the easiest transition.